Well, you take a Boston fanatic who grew up in Boston, and you meet a Philadelphia fanatic, and you compare the two greatest centers that ever played on each team, Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. You might have varying opinions. I'll ask the columnists first. Joe Gergen. Joe, where do you come down on the great comparison of Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain?
Come down on the side of championships. They all belong to Russell. As much fun as Wilt was to watch, and probably the greatest athlete maybe in history, it wasn't the team player that Russell was in the transfer to championships. One-on-one, take Wilt, but not 1 on 5 on 5.
All right, the Philly guy, Larry, here's your shot to bend Wilt.
Look, if you want to look at championships, obviously that's the most important thing, but it depends on what your question is. If you're looking at the greatest player of all time, which includes talent, which Joe was nice enough to say that Wilt was probably the greatest talent of all time, then you have to go with Wilt. The fact is, Russell played with all Hall of Famers during the course of his career, and probably most importantly, played with the greatest mind in basketball, Red Auerbach, during that time. When Wilt was finally convinced, and when he was finally surrounded by credible players, when he finally had a coach, Alex Hannum, that was a great coach in the NBA at the time, they won the championship and beat the Celtics that year. So, in my mind, there's no way. When you look at the record book and you look at rebounds, you look at points, they didn't, judge blocks in those days. But Wilt owns just about every single record in the record book. And to me, it's when you talk to players during that time outside of Boston, most of those players will say that Wilt was the better player.
We tend to disagree. Wilt was an incredible physical specimen. He probably will go down in the only player in the history of the league to score 100 points in a game. Probably the last player in the league to average 50 points a game. But the bottom line was, and he did play with great players. He played with Hal Greer, he played with Chet Walker, Luke Jackson, Billy Cunningham. He played with Jerry West and Elgin Baylor. And he only won 2 championships. And I got to feel that's the bottom line, Joe.
Well, I think, part of what he's right about Russell playing with all-stars, but he made some of them all-stars. He just gave them so much freedom on defense. They could do different things if they didn't have a guy behind him like Russell. So I think part of it, he did play with great players. He did have the best coach. I don't think there's any question about that. You could just ask Red himself if he were alive, he'd tell you that. But I think, he had so much, he was just such the core of probably the greatest dynasty in any professional sport we'll ever see. So I think you got to take him. He was the main reason for that.
Absolutely. Larry, we respect your opinion. You want to chime in? Absolutely. Derek wants to get in. The science guy. Sure. Derek, go ahead.
I think that if you look at it's obviously well and good that at least championships, but I think that the 100-point game that Wilt Chamberlain has is something that will never be matched again. And I think that if you look at the real sport, if you want to say who the better player is, I think if you have someone that did something that's never going to be done again, I think that you got to go with Wilt as the better player.
Interesting. Go ahead, Larry.
Let me just add one thing also, the fact that obviously Russell, as a winner, as a competitive athlete, was great. When you look at, again, if the question is the greatest all-around player, if it's just the player is the question, Russell on defense was great, so was Wilt. When he needed to be, he was as good as anybody out there. But then you also had the offensive side of the game, which is still important. And again, you can't compare, Russell, I think, had 11 Hall of Famers around him over the course of his career. And you're right, Chamberlain had Greer, he had Billy Cunningham, Chet Walker, but that was only for a couple of years. And when he finally got to LA, Elgin Baylor was older. But when you look at the total person, the total package, Wilt, by far, was the most dominant offensive player in the league. And from a defensive standpoint, again, Russell got the notoriety from the defense, but Chamberlain was right there. And if you look at the Chamberlain versus Russell numbers, Chamberlain completely outnumbered him out of all those things. So again, if you look at the greatest winner of all time, I say Russell. If you look at the greatest player of all time, I don't even think it's close. It's Wilt.
We respect the Philly opinion, Joe, but Joe, the thing is, they were such totally different players. Bill Russell never cared really about offense. He really never had to score. He had Sam Jones, he had John Havlicek, he had Don Nelson. his role was to set the fast break, block shots, offensive rebounding, defensive rebounding, and set picks. So offense was never really a big part of his game. So they really were completely different types of players.
I think when you look about it, the real difference between the two of them, and they were good friends, by the way. They would go out to dinner before games, but you never know on the court because they didn't give an inch. But the difference between them, I think, was the mind. Because Wilt was his own worst enemy sometimes. He got himself, he decided to prove he could rebound, so only get a rebound. Another time he tried to prove he could play defense and he didn't even try to score. The difference is Russell had the mind to play and also to be a coach for those last 2 years. He won 2 championships with himself as the coach after Halbach. That was pretty, I don't think Wilt could have, Wilt did try to manage once. Do you remember that? The San Diego Conquistadors, the ABA. He didn't even come to practice. He just came for the games. I think that was the difference. I think it was just it was a mental difference as much as anything.
All right, just one.